The hum of the engines was the only sound that broke the silence in the command deck of the Vanguard. Captain Amelia Monroe stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the vast expanse of space outside. Her hands gripped the control console tightly, but her mind was a whirlwind. The galaxy had never been this close to destruction. The Zaral, the most powerful alien empire humanity had ever faced, had turned its eyes on Earth, and now their massive fleet was bearing down on them. The entire human race was at risk. Amelia wasn't a military genius. She wasn't a hero or a war strategist. She was just a survivor, someone who had fought for peace in a galaxy that had never truly known it. But now she was leading humanity's last stand. A crackling sound broke the silence on the bridge, and Ray, her first officer, spoke up. His voice, though steady, carried a weight of concern. "Captain, the Zaral fleet is on the move. They've already taken out 3 of our colonies. We have less than an hour before they reach Earth." Amelia's chest tightened, but she didn't show it. The weight of leadership had never felt heavier than it did now. The fleet she commanded was a mix of different species: humans, Xanthar from the Rigelian system, Thalca warriors from the eastern colonies, and mercenaries from every corner of space. They weren't trained to work together. They didn't have the same goals, the same motivations. But one thing was clear: if they didn't unite, Earth would fall. "Bring up the enemy fleet on the screen," Amelia said, her voice calm but firm. She needed to see the threat with her own eyes. Ray nodded, his fingers moving swiftly across the control panel. On the view screen, a massive fleet appeared, its ships dark and menacing, their forms sleek and deadly. The Zaral fleet was like nothing they had ever encountered: huge capital ships, surrounded by smaller, agile destroyers. They were built for war, and they didn't take prisoners. Amelia swallowed hard, but she couldn't afford to show fear. "Tell the fleet to fall into formation. We're going to make them regret underestimating humanity." A few of the officers on the bridge exchanged nervous glances, but no one spoke. Amelia knew they were all scared. Who wouldn't be? The Zaral had already decimated their colonies. They were ruthless, efficient, and brutal. But they had one thing the Zaral didn't: the will to fight. "Captain," said Zale, the Xanthar commander, his voice low but intense, "we're not ready for this. Our fleet is too small. The Zaral have more ships, more firepower. This is suicide." Amelia turned to face him, her eyes locking with his. Zale was a veteran, a seasoned warrior who had fought in countless battles, but even he was uncertain. He didn't believe they stood a chance. Amelia understood the doubt in his eyes. The Zaral were a superior force, but if humanity didn't stand and fight now, it would be too late. "We fight or we die trying," Amelia said, her voice unwavering. "We have one shot at this, Zale. If we run, Earth is gone. We don't have the luxury of fear." Zale's gaze softened, and after a long moment he nodded. "Then we fight." Amelia's breath came out in a sigh of relief. They might be outgunned, but they weren't going to back down. She had made her decision. They would fight not for victory, but for survival. She turned to Ray. "Prepare the fleet for combat. Set course for the Zaral flagship. We go in, we hit hard, and we don't stop until we've given them everything we've got." Ray looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of doubt and determination. "Yes, Captain," he said, his voice resolute. "All ships fall into position. We're engaging the Zaral." The crew moved quickly, the tension in the air palpable. There was no turning back now. Amelia had called the shot, and now they would either rise or fall together. As the Vanguard and the rest of the fleet maneuvered into position, Amelia stood still, her hands gripping the console as she watched Earth grow closer on the view screen. It was beautiful, a blue and white jewel suspended in the void of space. Earth was their home, their last hope. She couldn't let it fall. Not after everything humanity had fought for. Ray's voice broke her thoughts. "Captain, the Zaral are charging their weapons. We need to prepare for their first strike." Amelia's jaw tightened. "Brace for impact." The ship rocked as the first Zaral blast hit their shields. The Vanguard shuddered under the force, but the shields held. For now. "Shields are holding, Captain," Ray reported, but there was worry in his voice. "But they won't hold much longer." Amelia didn't flinch. "We can't afford to hesitate. Order the fleet to fire on the enemy's flanks. We need to disrupt their formation." The battle had begun, and now they were in the thick of it. The Zaral fleet didn't just attack, they overwhelmed. Their ships were like shadows in the dark, relentless and unforgiving. Yet despite the overwhelming odds, the human fleet held its ground. They weren't as strong, but they were fast. They were unpredictable. The Zaral unleashed another wave of fire, and this time their weapons hit harder. The Vanguard's shields flickered, and for a split second, Amelia thought they might fail. The ship rattled again, the impact of the blast reverberating through the hull. "Shields at 40%, Captain," Ray reported, his voice strained. "We need to fall back. We're taking too much damage." Amelia clenched her fists, her eyes never leaving the view screen. They couldn't back down. They couldn't let the Zaral push them into retreat. "No," she said firmly. "We stay, we fight." Ray stared at her, his expression conflicted. "Captain, we can't win this with brute force. They've got too many ships." "We'll make them fight on our terms," Amelia said, her voice cold with determination. "We're going to use the terrain to our advantage, push the fleet through the asteroid belt, let them think we're retreating, then we strike." Ray blinked in surprise. "You want us to fight in the asteroid belt? It's dangerous." "I want us to win," Amelia interrupted, her voice hard. "We don't have time to play by their rules. We do this now or we lose everything." Ray hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Understood. All ships move into the asteroid field. Engage at my command." Amelia watched as the fleet shifted position, moving into the asteroid field. The Zaral ships, confident in their strength, followed without hesitation. They were too focused on destruction to realize they were walking right into a trap. "Now," Amelia said, her voice ringing out across the bridge, "all ships open fire." The Zaral fleet, now surrounded by rocks and debris, was caught off guard. The human fleet attacked with precision, taking down Zaral ships one by one. Their technology was superior, but they didn't know how to fight in the asteroid field. It was humanity's one advantage, an advantage they were going to make sure they used to the fullest. The battle was far from over, but for the first time the Zaral were starting to feel the pressure. The tide was turning. Amelia watched the chaos unfold before her, her heart pounding in her chest. They were winning. The Zaral fleet was losing its grip, and humanity was starting to show the galaxy what it was truly capable of. But the battle was still raging. The Zaral weren't going to give up easily. This was just the beginning. "Ray," Amelia called, her voice steady, "keep pushing them. We can't let up." Ray's voice came through, full of determination. "We're doing it, Captain. The Zaral are starting to break." She allowed herself a small breath of relief, but she knew they couldn't stop yet. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. The war was still ahead of them, but at least now they knew they could win. Humanity wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to win. And this battle, this moment, would define them forever. The battle had only just begun, but Captain Amelia Monroe could already feel the weight of it pressing down on her. The Vanguard shuddered under another powerful blast from the Zaral fleet. Their enemy was everywhere, surrounding them with superior firepower and technology. It seemed impossible, but there they were, the last hope of humanity and its allies fighting for survival. Amelia stood at the center of the bridge, her hands gripping the console tightly. The view screen showed the vast emptiness of space, dotted with flashes of light as the fleets clashed. Human ships, alien destroyers, and mercenaries, vessels all wove together in a fragile, chaotic formation under fire from the Zaral. They were outnumbered and outgunned. "Captain, our shields are weakening," Ray, her first officer, reported, his voice tense. "If we keep taking hits like this, we won't last long." Amelia took a deep breath. She knew the odds. They had no chance of defeating the Zaral fleet in a traditional battle. But they had something more powerful than sheer force. They had something the Zaral didn't expect: unity. "We hold," she said firmly, looking out at the dark void. "We fight like we've never fought before. Every ship, every crew member, every last person on this ship, we fight as one. That's how we win." Ray's eyes flicked toward her, searching her face for doubt, but he found none. Amelia had a calmness about her now, a steadiness in the chaos. Her words were a lifeline, a promise to the crew that no matter how impossible the fight, they weren't going to give up. Not yet. The sound of alarms and the hum of weapons filled the bridge, signaling the Zaral's next barrage. This wasn't a battle. It was a test, and she wasn't about to let her crew fail it. "Ray, order the fleet to move into formation," she commanded, her voice never wavering. "We use the asteroid field to hide our movements. The Zaral think they can predict us. Let's prove them wrong." Ray didn't question her. He immediately relayed her orders. The Vanguard and the fleet around it began shifting positions, pulling into a tighter, more unpredictable formation. They weren't running. They were weaving through the debris of the asteroid field, using the rocks as shields to confuse the Zaral targeting systems. It was risky, but it was the only option they had left. Captain Zale, the Xanthar commander, called from the communications panel. His voice was filled with urgency. The Zaral have adapted quickly. They've already started to target our weaker ships at the back. We won't last long if we stay spread out like this. Amelia's heart sank. Zale was right. They couldn't afford to be separated for too long. If they were to survive, they needed to hit the Zaral while they were still disorganized. She couldn't afford hesitation. "We go in close," Amelia said, her voice steady. "Ray, tell the fleet to focus all fire on their flagship. We take down the leader and the rest will scatter." Ray's eyes widened. "You're going for the flagship, Captain. It's heavily armored. It's their command center." "I know," Amelia replied, her gaze hardening. "But we have no choice. This is the only way to take them down." The crew held their breath, but Amelia's words were enough. She wasn't asking them to follow blindly. She was giving them the chance to be part of something greater, something bigger than any individual faction. They weren't just fighting for their lives anymore. They were fighting for their future, for Earth, and for every world that depended on their victory. The Vanguard surged forward, its engines roaring as it cut through the asteroid field. The enemy ships followed, but they were no match for the human fleet's unpredictable movements. Amelia watched as one of the Zaral destroyers fired a volley of energy beams, only to miss their target completely as the Vanguard danced around the debris. "Target their flagship," Amelia ordered. "Full power." The Vanguard's weapons fired in unison, a series of powerful energy blasts that tore into the flagship's shields. It shimmered, flaring brightly under the assault, but the Zaral flagship didn't go down. Not yet. "Shields at 30%, Ray reported, his voice tight. "We can't take much more of this." Amelia didn't blink. She could feel the weight of her decision now. They were committed. There was no turning back. "Press on," she shouted. "We're not backing down. We've come too far to quit now." For the next few minutes, the battle turned into a blur of gunfire and explosions. The Zaral ships were relentless, firing again and again, their weapons lighting up the sky. The Vanguard took hit after hit, but the crew held strong. They fought like a single unit, each person aware of the stakes. They had all been given a chance to be part of something bigger, and now they would make sure that chance wasn't wasted. Amelia gripped the armrest of her chair as the Vanguard swerved, narrowly avoiding another blast from the Zaral flagship. She had no choice but to push forward. If they didn't break the flagship's defenses now, they would lose the fleet. "Ray, fire everything we've got," she commanded. The Vanguard unleashed its full power, every weapon it had firing simultaneously. The explosion that followed rocked the flagship, and for the first time, Amelia saw the Zaral flagship falter. Their shields were down. The ship was vulnerable. "We've got them," Ray whispered, awe in his voice. "Captain, their flagship is failing." The crew erupted in cheers, but Amelia didn't allow herself to relax just yet. This was just the beginning. The Zaral would retaliate. They always did. "We're not finished," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the celebration. "Keep the pressure on. Focus fire on the command center. If we take that out, we break their control." The human fleet pressed forward, their ships moving with newfound determination. The Zaral were disorganized, their fleet scattered, their flagship on the brink of destruction. The battle raged on, but it was clear now, the Zaral were losing. The moment of victory arrived without warning. A final, concentrated blast from the Vanguard hit the Zaral flagship's command center, and the ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The shockwave sent a ripple through space, knocking several Zaral ships off course. For a moment, everything went quiet. "Captain, we've done it," Ray said, his voice filled with disbelief. "The flagship is gone. The Zaral are retreating." Amelia stood still, her eyes locked on the view screen. The Zaral fleet, now leaderless, was falling apart. Their once precise formations were shattered. They had no command, no direction. "We won," she whispered, her heart still racing, still unsure if she could believe it. "We actually did it." The bridge crew watched in stunned silence, disbelief and relief flooding their faces. The battle had been brutal, but against all odds, they had won. But Sarah knew the war wasn't over. They had won this battle, but the Zaral weren't done, not by a long shot. Still, in this moment, Amelia allowed herself to feel the smallest glimmer of hope. They had done what no one thought possible. They had faced an impossible enemy and emerged victorious. And they had done it together. That was something worth fighting for. The Zaral had underestimated them. Humanity was stronger than they realized. And Sarah Monroe had led them to victory. The Vanguard hung in space, its hull battered and bruised, the flickering lights on the bridge serving as a constant reminder of the fight they had just survived. The crew was exhausted. Their faces were etched with the weariness of war. Some were injured, some were shaken, but all of them had one thing in common. They had survived. And that was something no one had expected. Captain Amelia Monroe stood at the helm, her fingers gripping the console with such intensity that her knuckles had gone white. The Zaral fleet had been defeated for now, but she knew better than anyone that the Zaral were far from finished. They would come back. They always did. There was no real rest, not until the war was won. "We've done it," Ray, her first officer, said quietly from beside her. "But this isn't the end, is it?" Amelia's eyes flicked toward the view screen, where the scattered remains of the Zaral fleet floated in the vacuum of space. Some of their ships were still intact, drifting away, trying to regroup. The Zaral's retreat wasn't a victory. It was just a pause in the inevitable, a pause before they would strike again. "No," Amelia replied, her voice steady but filled with a quiet resolve. "It's not the end, but it's a start. We have time, and we need to make it count." The Vanguard was heavily damaged. Their weapons were offline and the ship's shields were barely holding, yet somehow they had come through the battle. Sarah could see the exhaustion on her crew's faces, but she also saw something else. Something that hadn't been there when they first came together. Determination. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were fighting back. Captain Zale, the Xanthar fleet commander, said, his voice low but filled with respect. "We may have won this battle, but we've lost too much. Our fleet is down to half its strength, and we don't have the resources to keep going much longer. We need a plan, a real one." Amelia turned to him, her expression serious but not defeated. Zale had been a warrior for as long as anyone could remember, and his words held weight. The battle had taken its toll on their forces, and there was still so much left to do. "I know," Amelia said, her voice calm but firm. "But we can't afford to back down. We've bought Earth some time, but we need more than that. We need to hit the Zaral where it hurts. They can't just regroup and come back again. This time we take the fight to them." Zale raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "And what do you propose we do? We've seen their power. What can we do with half a fleet and no reinforcements?" "We fight smart," Amelia replied. "We can't go in head-to-head with them, not like this. But we can disrupt their command, break their communication, and scatter their forces. If we can disable their flagship, their fleet will fall apart." Ray stepped forward, his eyes narrowed as he processed the information. "It's risky. The Zaral flagship is heavily protected, and if we don't take it down, they'll rally their remaining forces. It'll be a full-scale war." "We don't have a choice," Amelia said, turning to face her crew. "We have to do this now while we have the advantage. We can't wait for reinforcements. Earth is depending on us. They're still reeling from the Zaral's first wave, and we can't afford to give them another chance." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. The Zaral were more than just a threat. They were a symbol of everything humanity had been fighting against. Their brutality, their technology, their power, it all represented the forces that sought to erase the people of Earth from the galaxy. Sarah looked around at her crew, their faces filled with fatigue but also a quiet strength. She had led them into the fire and they had come out the other side. But this next step would be even harder. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for freedom, for humanity's place in the galaxy. "Ray, prepare the fleet," Amelia ordered. "Set a course for the Zaral flagship. We hit them fast, we hit them hard. We won't give them a chance to regroup." Ray nodded, his face set with determination. "Aye, Captain." The Vanguard and the remaining ships of the fleet moved into position. The final push was coming, and it would determine everything. They had no reinforcements, no backup. But what they had was each other. They had unity. A unity forged in battle, born of necessity, but strengthened by the willingness to fight for a better future. Amelia stood at the helm, watching as the Zaral flagship grew larger on the screen. It was a massive ship, the size of a small moon, with layers of armor and shielding designed to withstand the worst attacks. But they had one thing the Zaral didn't: speed and unpredictability. They could strike from unexpected angles, confuse the enemy, and create chaos. "Captain," Zale called out from the tactical station, "we're in range. The flagship's shields are still holding, but if we get close enough, we can launch a full-scale attack on their command center." Amelia nodded, her fingers tightening around the controls. "We can't afford to waste time. Let's do this." The Vanguard surged forward, cutting through space with precision. The fleet followed, moving as one. The Zaral flagship loomed ahead, a dark behemoth. But Amelia had a plan. They wouldn't go in full force. They would move in close, use the asteroid field to shield them, and fire on the flagship's weak points. They had to disable its command systems before the Zaral could react. As they neared the flagship, Amelia's heart raced. The tension was palpable, but her focus never wavered. This was their one chance. They couldn't fail. "Prepare to fire," Amelia ordered, her voice calm but filled with determination. "Focus on their command center. Take down their communications." The fleet's weapons fired in unison, bright blasts of energy lighting up the void. The Zaral flagship's shields flared, absorbing the blasts. But Amelia wasn't surprised. The real attack would come when they got close enough to breach its defenses. The Zaral flagship retaliated, firing its powerful weapons at the fleet. The Vanguard swerved, narrowly avoiding a direct hit. The Vanguard's shields flickered under the attack, but they held, just a little longer. "We've almost got them," Ray said, his voice filled with tension. "The shields are weakening." Amelia's heart was pounding in her chest. This was it, the final push. If they didn't succeed now, everything they had fought for would be lost. There was no going back. "Fire," she commanded, her voice strong and resolute. The Vanguard unleashed everything it had, a final, devastating barrage of energy blasts. The Zaral flagship's shields buckled under the assault, and the ship's command center began to fracture. The explosion that followed was massive, a burst of light and fire that filled the screen. The flagship was gone. For a moment there was silence. The crew stared at the view screen in disbelief. They had done it. They had taken down the Zaral flagship. "We've done it," Ray shouted, his voice filled with triumph. "The Zaral are in disarray. Their fleet is falling apart." Amelia stood still, staring at the empty space where the flagship had been. The battle wasn't over, but they had won a decisive victory. The Zaral were scattered, and for the first time, humanity had shown them that they could be beaten. But Amelia knew there was still work to be done. The Zaral were powerful, and they would regroup. This was just one battle in a long war, but today humanity had proven something. They had shown the galaxy that they weren't weak. They weren't just survivors. They were fighters, and they would never give up. The Vanguard trembled as another barrage of Zaral energy beams slammed into its shields. The crew braced themselves, but the ship held, its reinforced hull groaning under the pressure. The once pristine bridge, now cluttered with screens flashing warnings, was a testament to the battle they had fought and the battle still raging. Amelia Monroe stood at the helm, her knuckles tight around the console, but her gaze never wavered. She wasn't going to let her crew see her fear. Not now. Not when so much was on the line. The Zaral flagship, now battered and burning from their previous attack, remained a massive, unyielding presence on the battlefield. It loomed over the remaining human ships, its enormous size and strength a dark reminder of how small and outmatched they were in this war. Yet, as the Vanguard swerved once more, narrowly avoiding another wave of fire, Amelia's mind was set. They would win. She refused to believe otherwise. "Captain," Ray said from his post, his voice tense. "We've damaged their flagship, but they're still fighting. The Zaral fleet is regrouping. They're preparing to strike back hard." Amelia's gaze flicked over to the tactical display. The Zaral ships, now in disarray, were trying to pull together. Their communication systems, though damaged, were still working, and their reinforcements had arrived. But she could see it. There was a crack in their armor. The Zaral were not invincible, and they knew it now. "We've got one shot at this," Amelia said, her voice cold with determination. "We disable the flagship's command center, and the rest of the fleet will fall apart. We hit them with everything we've got." Ray hesitated for a moment, his eyes dark with doubt. "Captain, their shields are still holding. We've thrown everything at them, and they've absorbed it all. What if we're out of time? What if?" Amelia turned to him sharply, cutting off his words. "We don't have the luxury of doubt, Ray. If we hesitate now, we lose everything. We've already lost so much. For Earth, for the galaxy, we can't stop now." Ray looked into her eyes, and for the first time he saw the fire in her that had been missing before. It wasn't just the will to survive anymore. Amelia wasn't just fighting to protect Earth. She was fighting to show the universe that humanity wasn't weak, that they could stand up to the Zaral and every threat that came their way. "Understood," Ray said, his voice steady. "We'll make it happen." "Gather the fleet," Amelia said. "Tell them to form up around the Vanguard. We make our final push, now." The words left her lips with the weight of finality. The crew scrambled into action. Every officer, every soldier aboard the Vanguard knew what was at stake. The silence in the room was deafening. The only sounds were the quick footsteps of crew members moving in perfect synchrony, preparing for the most dangerous phase of their fight. Amelia watched as the other ships of the fleet, though battered, took their positions. Zale, the Xanthar fleet commander, was already giving orders to his crew, his voice fierce with confidence. The Xanthar had always been a proud species, and they fought with an honor that came from centuries of warfare. They were here, and they were ready. "Ray, how much time do we have until they launch their next wave?" Amelia asked, her gaze never leaving the view screen. Ray worked quickly, his fingers flying across the console. "They're preparing for the final attack. We've got minutes, maybe less." "Then we don't waste any more time," Amelia replied. "Lock in on their command center. Let's end this." The Vanguard surged forward, cutting through the space between the asteroids like a spear. The Zaral flagship, massive and menacing, loomed ahead, its weapons still charging, ready to destroy everything in its path. The Zaral ships surrounding it were slowly closing in, preparing to make their final stand. Amelia didn't look away from the view screen. The Vanguard was almost within range of the flagship now, and she knew this was their last chance. The fleet followed her lead, moving in unison, their ships forming a protective ring around the Vanguard. The firepower from the Zaral was relentless, but they couldn't keep this up forever. Their shields were weakening, just like the Zarals. This was it, the final showdown. "Captain," Ray said quietly, his voice full of urgency. "We're in range of their flagship. We're taking fire." "Fire everything we've got," Amelia ordered, her voice sharp. "This is our only chance." The Vanguard and the rest of the fleet unleashed their weapons, every gun firing at once, every missile, every energy blast striking the Zaral flagship. The first few shots hit its shields, but they held. It wasn't enough to break through. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. They had to do more. They had to take that flagship down. "Ray," she said, her voice a whisper, "focus fire on the command center. It's the only way." Ray's eyes met hers. "I know, Captain, it's all we've got." They fired again, this time focusing all their energy on the weak spot. The Zaral flagship's shields flared under the attack, but they didn't hold. For a brief moment, Amelia saw it, the opening. The shields were collapsing. She shouted, "Now, Ray, take the shot." The Vanguard fired again. This time, it hit the flagship's command center directly. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, with a tremendous explosion, the flagship erupted in a brilliant flash of light. The shockwave shook the ship, sending a ripple of energy through the fleet. Amelia held her breath as she watched the flagship disintegrate before her eyes. The Zaral flagship, once the pride of their fleet, was gone. "Captain, they've lost their command center," Ray shouted, his voice filled with disbelief. "The Zaral fleet is retreating. They're falling apart." The crew erupted into cheers, but Amelia didn't join them. Her chest tightened as she stared at the screen. The battle wasn't over. The Zaral weren't gone for good. But this was the turning point. "Ray, send word to the fleet," Amelia said, her voice quiet but full of authority. "We keep up the pressure. We don't let them regroup." Ray nodded, relaying the command. The fleet moved into formation again, and the remaining Zaral ships scattered. They were leaderless, their control systems broken. The Vanguard and its fleet had done what seemed impossible. They had shattered the Zaral's grip on the galaxy. The aftermath was quiet. The battle was over for now, and the Zaral fleet was in retreat. But Amelia knew this wasn't the end. This victory was only a glimpse of what they could do when they fought together. Humanity wasn't just a survivor. They had fought with everything they had, and they had won. "Captain," Ray said, his voice calm now, "we did it." Amelia stood still, staring at the wreckage of the Zaral fleet. The lights on the bridge flickered, the exhaustion in her body finally catching up to her. They had won, but the weight of leadership still hung heavy on her shoulders. The Zaral would be back. They would always come back. "We've won this battle," she said quietly, her eyes never leaving the screen. "But the war is far from over." But as she spoke, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time: hope. Humanity wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to win. And this time, they had shown the universe what they were truly capable of. It wasn't over, but the fight had only just begun. The Vanguard drifted through space, its engines humming quietly after the storm of battle. The lights on the bridge flickered, casting long shadows across the room. The once bustling command deck was now eerily still, the crew's exhaustion evident in their movements. They had won, but no one was celebrating. Not yet. Captain Amelia Monroe stood at the helm, staring out at the wreckage of the Zaral fleet. The vast expanse of space was dotted with the remnants of their enemy, destroyed ships floating aimlessly, the once mighty Zaral fleet now in ruins. She should have felt relief, but all she felt was the weight of everything they had lost. The battle had been brutal. The Zaral had thrown everything they had at them, and they had responded with every ounce of strength they could muster. But at what cost? The Zaral were defeated for now, but their empire was vast. There was no guarantee that the Zaral would stay down. They had been fighting for humanity's survival, but that victory was only temporary. Captain Ray's voice broke her thoughts. His tone was soft, filled with respect but also concern. "We've done it. The fleet's retreating and the Zaral flagship is gone, but we've lost so much. Our ships, our crew, the damage. It's too much." Amelia nodded, her throat tight. "I know, but we still have Earth, and that's something we can build on." Ray stepped closer, his voice filled with quiet intensity. "But what about the rest of the galaxy? The Zaral won't be gone forever. This battle may be over, but the war is far from finished." She turned toward him, her eyes filled with the weight of his words. "I know. I'm not blind to what we've lost, Ray, but I've seen what we're capable of. I've seen the strength in this crew. We've faced the Zaral head-on, and we've proven we can stand against them." Ray's face softened. "We're not the same as we were before, are we? You've changed. We've all changed." Amelia smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "War does that to people. It changes you, but it doesn't have to break us. We're not the underdogs anymore. We've shown the Zaral that they can be beaten. We've proven that humanity is not just a race to be wiped out. We're not going anywhere." Ray's gaze softened, and he nodded as though he had been waiting to hear those words. "You're right. We're not done yet." Amelia turned back to the view screen, her eyes scanning the wreckage of the Zaral fleet. They had done it. They had defeated their enemies. But there was a lingering question in her mind. Was this enough? Would Earth and the galaxy truly be safe now, or had they merely delayed the inevitable? The days that followed the battle were a blur of activity. The fleet limped home, each ship battered, every crew member exhausted. The Vanguard had survived, but barely. Repairs were underway, but there was still so much damage to repair. Amelia spent most of her time on the bridge, coordinating with Ray, Zale, and the other commanders, ensuring that the remaining forces were ready for whatever came next. The communication with Earth came through sooner than she expected. General Harris, the leader of Earth's resistance, appeared on the screen, his face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Captain Monroe," Harris said, his voice filled with a sense of gratitude, "you've done it. The Zaral have been driven back. Earth is still here, and we have you to thank for that. You've given us the time we needed to rebuild." Amelia stood straighter, her heart swelling with a sense of pride, though she could still feel the heaviness of the battle. "We've bought Earth time, General, but we both know the Zaral will be back. They always do." Harris nodded solemnly. "You're right, of course, but right now we're focusing on rebuilding. Thanks to you and your crew, we've got the breathing room we need to defend ourselves. This victory, it's going to inspire the entire human race. And Earth will rise from the ashes just like you promised." Amelia allowed herself a small smile. "That's all I wanted, General, a chance for Earth to survive, to fight back." "I can't promise you that the Zaral won't come again," Harris said. "But you've given us hope, and with that we'll fight. We won't back down." "Good," Amelia replied. "That's what we need. No matter what comes, we fight together." The call ended, but Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that the war was far from over. Yes, Earth had survived, but what about the other worlds? What about the rest of the galaxy? The Zaral Empire was vast. It would take more than one victory to ensure that they never threatened humanity again. The days turned into weeks, and the fleet continued to repair itself. There were still signs of life left in the Zaral remnants. They were rebuilding, regrouping, but they were no longer the unstoppable force they once were. The galaxy had seen that humanity could fight back, and now every species, every faction that had once stood alone was starting to come together. It wasn't easy. There were old rivalries, deep-seated grudges between species, and distrust among allies. But as the weeks passed, something began to shift. The Xanthar, the Thalka, the mercenaries, all of them saw the same thing. The Zaral weren't just a threat to humanity. They were a threat to everyone. Amelia had brought them together, and in doing so, she had sparked something more powerful than any weapon the Zaral could ever possess: unity. She could see it in the eyes of her crew, in the way the factions were beginning to work together. This was the first time they had truly acted as one. The Vanguard was fully repaired, its weapons upgraded, its shields stronger than before. The fleet had grown, too, with more ships joining the alliance. And as they prepared for the next battle, Amelia knew one thing for certain. Humanity wasn't just a survivor. They were a force to be reckoned with. She stood on the bridge once again, watching as the fleet assembled. The view screen showed Earth, still fragile but alive. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it was a victory nonetheless. They had survived the Zaral, but now they had to prepare for whatever came next. Ray walked up beside her, his expression more at ease than it had been in weeks. "You did it, Captain, we did it. We've shown the galaxy that humanity has a place here, that we're not just prey." Amelia nodded, her gaze fixed on the screen. "This is just the beginning, Ray. We've beaten them once. We'll do it again. But we need to be ready. The Zaral won't stop, and neither will we. We'll rebuild and we'll fight." Ray looked at her, his eyes filled with admiration. "You're more than just a leader, Captain. You've given us hope, and that's worth fighting for." Amelia smiled faintly, her heart heavy with the weight of everything they had lost. "We've come this far. We'll go further together." As the fleet prepared for its next mission, Amelia felt the weight of leadership settle on her shoulders. She wasn't just fighting for Earth anymore. She was fighting for a future, for every world that had joined the fight. And for the first time, she believed they could win. Humanity wasn't just a survivor anymore. They were a force, united and ready to take on whatever came next. And under Amelia's leadership, they would fight together. The Vanguard glided through the stars, its engines humming with quiet determination. Captain Amelia Monroe stood at the helm, her fingers lightly brushing the console, her mind far from the calm of space. Her crew had been through hell, and now they were preparing for what could be their final fight. She had led them to victory before, but the Zaral had only been forced to retreat. The galaxy was still at war, and it was only a matter of time before the Zaral regrouped, stronger than ever. Amelia's eyes shifted to the view screen, where Earth appeared in the distance. It was a bright blue jewel, beautiful and fragile, still reeling from the devastation the Zaral had brought. They had won, but the victory had come with sacrifices. Many ships had been lost, many good people. And as the fleet began to regroup, it was clear that the battle for Earth was far from over. "Captain," Ray's voice broke through her thoughts. He was standing beside her, his brow furrowed as he looked at the display. "The fleet is in position. We've got enough time to plan for the next phase, but we need to act fast. The Zaral are not going to stay down forever." Amelia nodded slowly, her heart heavy. She had spent so many nights worrying about the future, wondering if they were truly ready for the storm that was coming. The battle they had just fought was only a small part of a much larger war. The Zaral would return. They would come for Earth, for the galaxy, and they would bring everything they had. "I know, Ray," Amelia said quietly, her voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "We've won one battle, but it's just the beginning. We need to be prepared for whatever comes next." Ray turned to her, his face full of concern. "But how do we prepare for the Zaral coming back? Their fleet is vast, and we're already stretched thin. We don't have the numbers to face them head-on again." Amelia met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "We don't need to face them head-on. We need to fight smart. We'll use their own arrogance against them. The Zaral think they're invincible. They think we're nothing but an afterthought. We'll show them that humanity is more than just a nuisance." Ray raised an eyebrow, still uncertain. "How?" "We'll use their tactics against them," Amelia said with a quiet smile. "We'll lure them into a trap. We've already shown them that we're not afraid to fight. Now we make them pay for underestimating us." Ray's expression softened. He nodded, understanding what she was getting at. Amelia wasn't just a survivor. She was a leader, someone who could make the impossible seem like the only option. She had done it before, and now, with Earth's survival on the line, she was ready to do it again. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity as the Vanguard and the remaining ships in the fleet moved into position. The crew worked tirelessly, repairing the damage done to the ships, preparing their weapons, and making sure everything was in place for the next phase of the plan. But even with the preparations underway, there was an unease that lingered in the air. Every member of the crew knew the cost of the next battle. The Zaral might have retreated, but they weren't finished. Not yet. Amelia moved through the halls of the Vanguard, her steps steady but heavy. She could feel the weight of leadership pressing down on her shoulders, the responsibility for every life on the ship. She passed crew members in the hallway, some smiling at her in passing, others too exhausted to even meet her eyes. She knew that some of them were still reeling from the losses. The Zaral had taken so much from them already. They needed a reason to keep going. They needed hope. She entered the briefing room where the commanders of the fleet were gathered, waiting for her to arrive. Ray, Zale, and the others looked up as she entered, their faces filled with respect and expectation. Amelia didn't need to say a word. She could see it in their eyes. They were ready. Captain, Zale said, standing as she entered. "The fleet is in position. We're ready to move out." Amelia nodded, her voice steady. "Good. We've already proven we can stand against them. Now we prove we can defeat them. We've been given a chance to strike back, and we're going to take it." The other commanders nodded in agreement, but Sarah could see the flicker of doubt in their eyes. It was natural. After the devastation they'd already faced, it was hard to believe they could pull off another victory. But that was where the Zaral had made their mistake. They had underestimated humanity, and that was something Amelia wasn't about to let slide. "We've made it this far," she continued, her voice unwavering. "We've faced worse odds and we've survived, but now we need to strike at the heart of the Zaral, their fleet. We know their strengths, but we also know their weaknesses. We'll use that. We'll make them pay for every life they've taken." The room was silent for a moment. Then Zale spoke up, his voice filled with quiet respect. "You're right, Captain. We've seen what they can do, but we've also seen how far we've come. We can do this. We fight together." A wave of understanding passed through the room. The crew wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something bigger. They were fighting for each other. Amelia's eyes hardened. "We do this together or we don't do it at all. Every ship, every crew member, every person on this fleet, this is our fight, and we're going to win." The Vanguard's engines roared to life as the fleet surged forward. The battle was about to begin, and this time, Amelia wasn't just leading them into battle, she was leading them to victory. They would fight smart, they would fight hard, and they would fight together. But as the fleet moved into position, the Zaral ships appeared on the horizon, their vast fleet filling the view screen. The Zaral were already waiting for them, their weapons ready. The calm before the storm had passed. Captain, Ray said, his voice tight with tension. "They're closing in fast. This is it. There's no turning back now." Amelia stood tall, her hand resting on the console. "No turning back," she whispered. "This is the moment we've been waiting for. We make them regret ever underestimating humanity." As the Zaral ships advanced, Amelia's pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. She knew this battle wasn't just about strength. It was about heart, and humanity had that in spades. "Prepare for battle," she said, her voice steady and filled with conviction. "We fight for Earth. We fight for the galaxy. We fight for our future." The Zaral may have been stronger. They may have been more advanced. But what they didn't have was humanity's spirit, and that was something no weapon in the galaxy could ever defeat. "Let's finish this," Amelia said as the first shots rang out. The fight for their future had begun, and Amelia Monroe was ready to lead them to victory. No matter what it took, the Vanguard hurtled through the stars, its engines roaring as the ship and the rest of the fleet positioned themselves for the final confrontation. The Zaral were right in front of them, an overwhelming force, far stronger than anything humanity had ever faced. Yet here they were, standing firm, ready for battle. They had no choice now. Earth was depending on them. The galaxy was depending on them. Captain Amelia Monroe stood at the helm, her hands clenched around the console, her jaw set with determination. The Zaral flagship loomed large on the screen, its massive size and sleek design intimidating. The last time they had fought, they had managed to break the Zaral's command structure. But now the Zaral had regrouped, their forces reinforced. This was the final fight, and they needed to make it count. Ray, her first officer, stood beside her, his face filled with the same unwavering resolve. "Captain," he said, his voice steady despite the tension, "the fleet is in position. We're ready for the assault." Amelia nodded, but her eyes never left the view screen. She could feel the weight of the moment, the pressure of what they were about to do. If they didn't succeed now, if they didn't strike with everything they had, Earth could fall. Humanity could fall. She had seen the faces of the crew, exhausted, scarred, but still determined. They had fought through so much, lost so many, yet they stood together, united by one goal. Amelia wasn't just fighting for her crew anymore. She was fighting for the future of Earth and every world that had joined their cause. "Hold steady," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "We've made it this far, we can't give up now." Ray gave her a reassuring look, but he didn't speak. They both knew the stakes. The Zaral were no longer just an alien threat. They were a symbol of everything humanity had been fighting against. Their weapons, their strength, their relentless drive to destroy, everything had led to this moment. Captain Zale, the Xanthar commander, called out from the tactical console. "We've got incoming fire. Their weapons are charging. They're preparing to strike." Amelia's heart raced, but she forced herself to focus. "Brace for impact," she commanded, her voice steady. "We fight back now." The first blast from the Zaral hit the Vanguard's shields with a deafening crash. The ship rocked, and alarms blared across the bridge. The shields flickered, but they held, for now. Ray gripped his seat as the next wave of fire came. "Shields at 40%, Captain. We can't take another hit like that." "Then we won't let them hit us," Amelia replied, her voice calm, but with the unmistakable strength that had carried them this far. "Tell the fleet to stay in formation. Move in close. Let's show them how we fight." The fleet followed her orders, moving into formation around the Vanguard like a shield. The Zaral fired again, their energy blasts lighting up the dark expanse of space. But this time, the human ships were ready. They dodged and weaved, using the speed and unpredictability the Zaral hadn't accounted for. "Focus on their flagship," Amelia ordered. "We need to disable their command center. If we take that out, the rest of their fleet will fall apart." Ray's voice was tight with urgency as he relayed the command. "All ships, target the Zaral flagship's command center. Fire at will." The fleet unleashed everything it had. Explosions filled the screen as the Zaral flagship took hit after hit. The massive ship staggered, its shields flickering under the sustained attack. The human fleet didn't stop. They couldn't stop. This was their one chance to win. "Captain, the flagship's shields are weakening," Zale reported. "We're getting through." But even as the Zaral flagship faltered, their retaliation was swift and brutal. Another wave of energy blasts hit the fleet, causing several ships to break formation. The Vanguard shook violently under the onslaught, and alarms blared once again. "Shields are down to 20%, Ray reported, his voice strained. "We're losing ground." Amelia's stomach twisted. They couldn't take much more of this. The Zaral were relentless, but she refused to give up. Not now, not when they were so close. "Ray, give them everything we've got. Full power. This is the last push." Ray nodded, his fingers flying over the console. The Vanguard's weapons powered up, and another blast of energy shot out toward the Zaral flagship. This time, the blast hit the flagship's command center directly. For a moment, everything was still. The flagship's shields shimmered one last time, and then, nothing. The ship exploded, its destruction lighting up the sky. The shockwave from the explosion rippled across space, knocking several Zaral ships off course. The silence that followed was deafening. Amelia's heart stopped for a beat as she stared at the wreckage of the flagship. The Zaral flagship, their command center, was gone. "We did it," Ray said, his voice filled with disbelief. "We've taken down the flagship." Amelia felt a rush of relief wash over her, but she didn't allow herself to relax. The Zaral fleet was still there, still fighting. Their flagship was gone, but they were not finished. Not yet. "Stay sharp," Amelia said, her voice firm. "We're not done yet. Keep the pressure on. The Zaral will scatter. We take out the rest of their fleet." The crew moved quickly, relaying her orders. The Zaral fleet, now leaderless and in disarray, tried to regroup, but they were slow. The human fleet, using the momentum from their victory, pressed forward, targeting Zaral ships one by one. The tide had truly turned. The Zaral fleet, once a unified force, was now broken. Their ships were retreating, their formation collapsing. And as the Vanguard led the charge, Amelia could see the hope returning to her crew. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to win. "Captain," Ray said, his voice quieter now, full of awe. "The Zaral fleet is retreating. They're abandoning the battle." Amelia watched as the last of the Zaral ships turned and fled into the darkness. It was over. The Zaral had been defeated, at least for now. "We did it," Ray whispered. Amelia's heart raced. She had led them to victory. She had brought together a fleet that was smaller, weaker, and outmatched, and they had defeated the Zaral. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of it all, the exhaustion, the fear, the losses, but she couldn't dwell on it. There was still work to be done. "We've won," she said softly, her voice steady. "But this is only the beginning." The crew of the Vanguard erupted in cheers, their faces lighting up with the joy of victory. They had fought together, and they had won together. Amelia turned back to the view screen, watching as the last of the Zaral ships disappeared into the blackness of space. Humanity had survived. They had fought back, and for the first time in a long time, Amelia allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt since the war began: hope. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over, and no matter what came next, she would lead them. They would face the storm together. Humanity was still standing, and they were stronger than ever.